I would say that the phrase full panel STI test is meaningless, but that would imply that it's harmless. It is anything but harmless. That phrase, full STI panel, has caused the spread of countless STIs in the United States. And because nobody else will say that out loud, I will today. The phrase full panel STI test must die. I'm going to show you two different full panel STI test results on the screen. The first person took a full panel STI test and tested negative for everything. They were probably pretty relieved. In their mind, they don't have a sexually transmitted infection. Happy days are here. The second person also took a full panel STI test, but they tested positive for two different sexually transmitted infections. And that was probably a bummer, but thankfully they're going to get treatment and be okay. The truth is, this is the same person who took these tests at the same time. But yes, they are both full panel STI tests. They just tested for different things because that phrase, full panel STI test, doesn't mean anything whatsoever. Now, one of the reasons that people think that the phrase full STI panel means something is because you can go to the doctor and ask for that and you're going to get some tests run. And that makes it sound like that phrase worked, right? The problem is that when you go to the doctor and ask for a full STI panel, you're asking them to take a quiz that they have not studied for. Look, you walk into the doctor's office, you ask that question. You imagine the doctor's looking at their computer and there's a button they click there that says, order a full STI panel for this patient. That doesn't exist. Instead, they have to look at you and think about all the STIs that there are and all of the STIs which you might have and all of the ones of which your insurance might cover. And they have to order those individually. So a testing panel might have 14 different sexually transmitted infections. Can you imagine trying to remember 14 different things as you hunt around the software and order these? It's exceedingly difficult. And that's why if you went to 10 different doctors and asked for a full panel, you would get 10 slightly different STI tests. In fact, let's remove the word slightly. You would get 10 wildly different sets of tests ordered for you because the phrase full panel STI test doesn't mean anything, and that's the problem. Now, on the online world, it's even more difficult. Look, I own an online STI testing company. I know exactly how this works. I could go to my website right now, remove 3 different diseases that we test for, add 2 more, do whatever I want. And at the top of that screen, I can put the phrase full panel STI test so it shows up on Google when people search that term. I can do that, nobody's stopping me because it's a made up term. Anything and everything can be a full panel STI test. I'm going to show you 3 real companies' testing panels on the screen right now, all 3 of which are advertised as full panels. And we're not gonna pick them apart. We're not gonna worry about what they should have included or what they shouldn't. They're making these decisions based upon pricing, how much people are willing to pay, how much conversions they'll get, etc. These are not recommendations from the Surgeon General, believe me. But the thing you need to realize is just the variety. Notice how they don't even have the same number of tests, let alone testing for the same thing. So when somebody goes and buys a full panel STI test and gets a negative result, they imagine that they don't have any STIs. And oftentimes that's just not the case because they don't know what they were tested for. And more importantly, they don't know what they were not tested for. So how does this spread STIs? Well, I can give you an example from my own life. Anytime I've ever tried to have the conversation with a potential partner about STI testing, I will ask her, have you been STI tested recently? And they always have, because the people I hang around with, that's just part of what they do. And then I'll say, what were you tested for? And they always say everything. It's always that word, everything. And then I'll say, what does everything mean? And they'll say, oh, a full panel. That's always the second thing they say. And then I'll say, do you know exactly what you were tested for? No, but it was everything. It circles back to everything. And then I'll say, did you get a throat swab test? Like, did someone swab the back of your throat with a Q-tip to check for gonorrhea or chlamydia? And they always say, what the hell is that? No, that didn't happen. And that's just one example where you use this crutch, you use this term that you think means something, and it doesn't. And at the end of the day, you don't know what you were tested for. And more importantly, quite frankly, you don't know what you were not tested for. So what can you do instead? Well, understanding that sexually transmitted infections are just viruses, bacteria, and parasites, which have absolutely nothing to do with each other whatsoever, other than they're sexually transmitted. They're not related at all. So you can test for HIV 17 times in a row. It's still not going to tell you if you have syphilis, for example. You can be tested for syphilis 14 times in a row. It's not going to tell you if you have oral gonorrhea. Testing for oral gonorrhea isn't even going to tell you if you have genital gonorrhea. These are individual individual infections. And so you're just going to have to learn more about sexually transmitted infections and see which ones you would like to be tested for and which ones you don't care about. So for example, you can go to shamelesscare.com and look at our 14 panel STI test. Realize, of course, that even that is not a full panel, but it's pretty comprehensive, I do say. Not entirely comprehensive, but pretty comprehensive. And you can look at those assays and you can look at those infections and you can think about them. Mycoplasma genitalium, for example, you can ask ChatGPT, think about it, look around, and decide if that's something you would like to be tested for or not. It's perfectly fine, in my opinion, for some of these infections if you look at and say, I've read about that, and I've learned about that. I don't care if I have it, and I don't care if I spread it. And if that's the case, it doesn't need to be included in your testing. So sex is really fun, and to be honest with you, STIs are not as big of a deal as most people make them out to be. If you have gonorrhea, chlamydia, something like that, easily treatable. HIV, if you're high risk for HIV, is basically preventable these days. And if you do happen to contract it, there's great therapies in place. You can live a long, healthy life. I don't make these videos to scare people about sex, quite the opposite. But when I see really smart people who think of themselves as really progressive in sexual health, using the phrase full panel, I just can't help but think that it's an opportunity lost. And for all of us to think more deeply about this subject, make smarter decisions, and get involved in our own set of tests that we're tested for, rather than leaving it up to a doctor who is not going to make the same decisions as the next doctor, or an STI clinic that is not going to make the same decisions as the next STI clinic. Well, I'm Robert from Shameless Care. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.